Okay, we are now recording, so we will go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining in our April series of the Beginning Farmer Rancher Zoom series. Today we're going to have two speakers talking a little bit about sheep and goats, and then also predator control as well. And so our first speaker this afternoon will be Mr. Justin McDaniel, and he is the ag educator for McLean County up in Purcell. So if you have any questions during this Zoom series, feel free to put them in the chat box and then we can get them answered towards the end, okay? And Justin, feel free to take it away.
I guess I identify as Emily Taylor now. So that's what it says on my screen. But I'd like to thank Taylor for the opportunity to speak to the group this evening about along the lines of small ruminant production, sheep and goats mainly. One of the main topics that always comes up when you start talking about sheep and goat management is predator control, and definitely a very important topic to discuss and to be aware of. So tonight we're just going to share a little bit of information with you about predator control. The first thing that we'll talk about is I don't know why that's not advancing my slide. Hang on, let me stop this. See if I can. It's advancing now. Okay. So sorry for mix up here. We'll get this worked out and then we'll.
You're back on the phone.
Okay. Can you see now?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now we'll start. So when we start talking about a predator control, first thing we need to do is define what is a predator, and probably the number one predator in Oklahoma is the coyote. They tend to be the most economically burdensome on sheep and goat management, and closely behind that is the pet dog, feral dogs, and that's the one that a lot of people have trouble believing that their dog, their sweet house dog, would have the ability to kill something, but it does. And both of these are together, they make up the biggest majority of predators. So most of it is in the canine family. Along with that, bobcats are efficient killers, but due to their size, they're typically not a big predator problem. And then to lesser extents, foxes, eagles, mountain lions, bears. And the reason for that is we don't have very many of those in Oklahoma. Now, we've done talks before for producers that were in Florida. They had alligator problems. Another predator that came on the scene in the last few years is the Mexican vulture. And these Mexican vultures actually do prey on live animals, and they are becoming a big issue. The biggest issue is that they are protected by the Migratory Bird Act, and so they are protected so they're harder to control. So now that we've determined what is a predator, how much damage do they do? Between all of the causes of death, about 66% of it is due to predator control. 2/3 of that is due to coyotes. Another third of it is due to dogs, and then just a few in the others. But out of the the 66% that is caused by predator control, the biggest majority of that is coyotes, and then domestic dogs. So we can see from that. So that gives us an indication of why it is important. One of the reasons is they are economically valuable. Some very dated information from 2015 estimated we lost about 500,000 goats in the United States, with about 125,000 of those due to predation. The other 375,000 were due to respiratory, viral, weather theft, whatever it may be. So at least 25% of the economic deaths are due to predators. And this is different than cows. So if you raised large livestock in the past, predation is not typically a problem in large livestock, where smaller ruminants, poultry, it is definitely, predators are definitely something to consider. In a recent survey that was done, about 93% of the operations use some kind of non-lethal method to control predators. The most common method was fencing and guard dogs, while producers spent about $1,100 on non-lethal control and about $450 on lethal methods. I didn't know ammunition had got that expensive, but I don't know how you spend $450, but I guess you maybe have to buy a new gun. That's what I'd tell my wife. 1 in 40 operations sought help from state and federal trappers, and that's something that shouldn't be overlooked, because we have those in our state and they are free for services that you can use. And so that's something that shouldn't be overlooked, because these guys are professionally trained and they can do a very good job, and they can be a big assistance to you. So if you are experiencing some predator problems, don't forget about those state and federal trappers. Most assume that predator control means that we kill the offensive animal. And while that can be true, that is definitely control. The most effective method is we just don't let the predator to our animals and keep the predators away from the prey. That's the most effective way. That we don't have to kill it as long as we can control it and manage it. Sometimes that's the only method, but a lot of times if we seek out other options, we can find other options that will provide us with good control and more effective, efficient control. So, we've always said predator control means that we wake up with just as many animals as we went to bed with. And that means that we have kept them safe and we've kept them out of harm's way. Integrated predator management is an integrated approach to reduce depredation, and that relies on a couple of methods: the passive methods, which is non-lethal, and then the active methods, which is lethal control. And no single method of approach will totally eliminate predation. So hunting by itself will not, fencing by itself will not, guard dogs by themselves will not totally eliminate predation. But typically, it's just like tools in a toolbox. We have multiple tools in the toolbox, and if we use them, we can do wonderful things with them. Same thing with all of our approaches to predator management. One method will not probably provide you with all the control you want, but if we use several of these methods that we're going to talk about, we should be able to achieve that. So just some of the bases, and we're going to cover all of these individually: physical separation, cultural practices, and deterrents. Fencing was one of the main ones during the survey that producers felt like they got effective management of predators by building adequate fences. And that a well-constructed fence should be able to repel most predators, but to build a well-constructed fence that is capable of that is going to incur a pretty high initial cost. And the good thing about it is if we build a good fence up front, it will last us for several years, and the reduced animal losses will help to pay for that. But the big thing is incurring that huge expense up front to retain our animals and keep them safe. But to build a fence that is adequate to hold our goats in, we're going to need a good fence to begin with. And so a fence that is good enough to hold goats won't necessarily always keep out coyotes or dogs, because dogs and coyotes tend to dig under. They'll go to a low place in the fence. They will find a spot where water's been running under, and then all they have to do is a little bit of digging, and they can tunnel under and gain access to the property. So to truly be effective, a fence needs to be buried below the ground surface up to 2 feet to keep something from digging under, burying under. And so that's going to be pretty expensive in and of itself, the trenching and putting a fence not only above ground but below ground as well is going to be a pretty expensive thing. Kidding sheds, that removes goats and kids from high risk areas, because most of our females, when they decide to go into labor, are probably going to try to isolate themselves from the rest of the herd. And in isolating themselves, they put themselves at risk for predation, because being separated from the herd, being out in somewhere that has some cover in it, that is the perfect area for them that they consider for a kidding area, but it's also a perfect place for predators. So making it available to pin these females up when they're kidding or lambing, that gives them a chance to bond with their offspring, as well as be safe from predators that might take opportunity during the kidding process or the birthing process to try to attack these animals. Typically, if we're going to build kidding sheds, we're going close to the house or the barn. That just makes them easier to check on the animals. But then being in close proximity to the house or barn is going to make it a little less opportunistic for most of our predators. Coyotes are probably not going to come in close proximity to houses or barns, where domestic dogs have no problem. They'll come right up in your backyard because they have no fear of humans. And so it won't deter all of our canine problems, but it should go a long way in deterring the coyotes. So if you're using a holding fence around it, that's used something that dogs can't get into. And then if you have a good shelter like that, that's good for during the birthing time, lambing or kidding, but it's also a good shelter for bad weather, so it can serve 2 purposes. Another option that a lot of people have used is night penning, because most of our predation from coyotes will happen between sunset and sunrise. And so if we can get those animals contained in a close area where we can protect them during that time period, that goes a long way to preventing predation. Sometimes it is difficult to do night penning because someone has to be there at night to pin them up, and they have to be there in the morning to let them back out. And that can pose to be a big problem. But if you have guard animals, it makes their job easier because all the animals are contained in one area. We use this. We have sheep ourselves, and we don't actually pen at night, but we have acclimated our sheep to come to the barn every night because we feed in the evenings. So they come up because they know it's feeding time. And then once we feed, they typically bed down real close to the feeding area right there by the barn. Well, they may not be locked in there. They're right up there by the night lights and some of the security of that. And so while it's not 100% effective because the gates are still open, they are still up there where they're not just bedding down in the back of the pasture where there's no night lights or anything like that. And it makes the guard dog's job a lot easier to watch them when we do that. Fright tactics are something, could be strobing lights. It could be something blowing in the wind, something that is motion activated. But anything that is like this will, if it's something that is very erratic in its pattern, goes a long way in helping to prevent that. But something that just flashes, it just blinks very rhythmically, is probably, they're going to get acclimated to that. I've seen coyotes that came into the pasture when tractors were running during hay season, and no fear at all, even the loud noises, but it was very rhythmic and they weren't afraid of that at all. We all have been somewhere probably and seen the dead coyote hanging from the fence. That probably doesn't serve as a big deterrent. It works very well for that one, but it probably doesn't go a long way to deter the other coyotes that are in the area from. But I've always said, the one that you had to kill to hang on the fence, it was very effective for him. So maybe not as effective as others. It may make you feel better, but we don't know how far it goes in actually reducing predation. Removing carrion, removing carcasses, afterbirth should be removed from pastures or pens. If we have an animal that dies, getting that disposed of. This goes a long way to minimize smell and prevent those predators from ever developing a taste for our livestock. This especially goes for the Mexican vultures, because if you leave dead animals out, you're definitely going to attract them. You're going to attract coyotes. You're going to attract all kinds of things that you don't want to have there. We have had some people that were concerned about guard dogs that clean up after birth, carcasses that are left out there. Sometimes are eaten by the guard dogs, and people are concerned about that. We've had that, and I will just tell you, if you have livestock guardian dogs and you don't want them to eat after birth, you better be right there with them when it happens, because if not, they are going to. I've never had one that it caused an ill problem with. Now, there's always opportunities, and we can talk about those, but I've never had any problems from that happening. Most of the time, what we learn is that they are doing that to prevent another animal from coming in there and getting it. So if they remove it, then they don't have to protect it from coyotes or anything else that may be coming in there to try to get it. And then to pay close attention to any weak animals that you have. If you have a weak animal that's not keeping up with the herd, they're definitely going to make an easy target, and eventually they're going to pass away. They're going to die somewhere out in the pasture if we don't do something about them. And so either pinning them up close to the barn or just selling them before they get to that point to help reduce that problem. Habitat management. Talking about goats, most of the time the reason we get goats is to clean up brush and rough areas. And so you say, well, that's the reason I got goats, is for habitat management. And the reason that we talk about that is coyotes and bobcats are ambush hunters. So they're looking for cover to get to their prey. And most of the time, coyotes that we see in the area, they're probably not there just for your sheep or goats. They're probably there for small animals, rabbits, whatever it may be. Brush piles are a perfect environment for them as well, mice, whatever it may be, to house there. So if you have those, that is just a perfect environment to a calling card for the coyotes, and it just makes your predator control methods a little more difficult. And if we are going to use goats for brush control, we want to restrict their movement where they're in small areas, because if you truly want goats to clean up an area, you have to keep them confined to a small area so that they clean it up, because goats are browsers and they're going to eat a bite here and run up and eat a bite somewhere else. So pinning them up in small areas not only makes them more efficient at controlling the brush, but it keeps them in a smaller area, makes them easier to watch and to take care of. And then if we can move them out of those areas before dark, where predator movement's going to be really high. Then we get into guardian animals. They're not necessarily something you have to have, but they can be very useful. If you've utilized some of the other passive methods, and you may not need a guardian dog. You may get along just fine without one. And there are a variety of livestock guardian animals available. Uh, Probably the most popular is the dog. Donkeys and llamas have been used successfully as well. What I can tell you is you hear good and you hear horror stories about all three of those. There are good dogs, there are bad dogs, there's good llamas, donkeys. There's bad stories about all three of them as well. So it depends on who you talk to and the experiences that they've had. Uh, all three of them can be good, and with the wrong animal, all three of them can be bad. Depending on what your goals are, what your management practices are, how you would like to handle them, you may or may not even need them. You know, to talk first about the livestock guardian dog, here we have Sam the sheepdog. And if you ever spend a lot of Saturday mornings watching cartoons, you know Sam, he's pretty good at his job, but you know, we get a lot of questions about livestock guardian dogs and how do you train them? And I think the biggest response to that is most of the time we don't train them. A lot of that is instinct. These dogs have been bred for generations, for thousands of years to do this, and that is most of the time that instinct is there without our interference. Uh, some some training is essential. There are some things that you need to train them to do, and one of those is to human interaction. However brief that may be, you want your dogs to at least be friendly to to you, to your family. If you can get them where they'll lead and tie, that's great. Probably it takes a lot of work to do that, but we'll talk about some of the reasons that you may want to. If you're going to use snares and your dog ever gets snared and he's used to being tied up, then he gets snared. He just sits there. If he's not used to being tied up, he fights the cable restraint and can cause some pretty big damage to him. Uh, how much time do we spend with these dogs? I can tell you from personal experience, my wife and daughter uh, spend a lot of time with our livestock guardian dogs. I've never had it have a negative impact on any of them, on the my wife or daughter or the dogs. And time spent with them should be productive, but short. If I don't spend a lot of time with them, you want them to bond with something, and probably the animals that they're protecting. If you don't spend a lot of time with them, they're going to bond with the sheep and goats. But you want them to at least know you, recognize you if they see you. Uh, we get some questions about what's the best breed, and that's kind of like saying what's the best kind of pickup or the best kind of bull to buy or the best kind of goats to raise. There's good and there's differences between all the breeds, and a good one is a good one, and a bad one is no good at all. Uh, there's been very little difference between female and intact or neutered males. The neutered males do tend to wander less. Um, so what you pick one of the few breeds that we'll talk about here, and male, female. I mean, one of the things that I can tell you from our years of raising sheep and goats and dealing with livestock guardian dogs is one of the things that just in the nature of a dog, male dogs are very territorial, so they guard somewhere. Female dogs are very maternal, so they guard something. They are very cautious and watchful over the flock or the herd of goats, whatever it may be, and they protect them. Male dogs tend to protect the territory because they are very territorial. So if something comes inside their territory, that is that puts them on alert. Females really care less about territory as long as they're not bothering the 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 herd, the flock, whatever it may be. So there is some differences in that in their protection style. If you're going to pick a breed, you want to pick a breed based on availability. I mean, there are some very good breeds out there, but where are you going to find them? How much are they going to cost? Are they even available when you need them? So be aware of that. Some of the more common breeds, probably the most common, are the first two, the Great Pyrenees and the Anatolian Shepherd. And then we have the Akbash, the Maremma, and the Commodore. The Great Pyrenees is probably one that started out being very popular in the United States, originally from France. These are a very good-natured dog. One of the dogs that we find to be pretty laid back. If you're going to have people in close proximity to your place, probably they're more accepting of people, than some of the other breeds. That is good, but a very large dog, a dog that, while he is large and doesn't look like he is energetic, they are pretty energetic, and so they need a job. They're not really a dog that you want to have without a job. And so a dog that can weigh at maturity will weigh 140 plus pounds. So a big dog, one of the dogs that, and as these dogs increase in size, there are some issues that you need to be concerned of: hip dysplasia, some hip and joint problems. And one of the things that we bring that up is, if you are going to neuter male dogs, they recommend that you at least keep these dogs intact till they're about a year old before you neuter them, because that helps them to develop a little better and get their muscle development better, to help prevent some of that hip problem later in life. And so if you are going to, that is one of the problems, because if you wait till they're a year old, they've already developed a lot of bad habits, but it's a give and take between that. The Anatolian Shepherd, another big dog, originally from Turkey. These dogs are probably a little more in tune with the guardian aspect, and not as trusting of people that may show up. They are heavy, big muscle, can be stubborn, because they are very independent, I guess would be the best way to put it. But these dogs have to be independent, because you're not there to tell them what to do. If they depended on you to tell them what to do, it's really hard for them to do their job at 2 o'clock in the morning when you're in the house in bed and something starts to happen. So they are independent, and they have to be, because they have to make that decision when it happens, because no one's going to be there to tell them what to do. Very good dog. Probably most of the dogs that we have at our house now are a mixture of these first two breeds. The Akbash, long snout, big tall, big dog, big structure, big framed, but once again, very attentive to the herd, very protective, very territorial. So the Maremma is probably the dog that we can tell you it's not about the size of the dog in the fight. It's about the size of the fight and the dog. They're not a big dog, but still very, very dedicated to protecting the flock, protecting whatever they bond to. And while they may not be as big in size, they have a lot of heart to protect. And so, and most of that is the biggest thing with a livestock guardian dog, is most time barking takes care of most of the issues that we have. Just knowing that there's something there will deter a lot of predators. And so it never comes to a physical altercation. So it doesn't really matter how big this dog is. If he's barking and it keeps everything run off, then everything's good. The other one is the old Commodore, the old rag mop. These dogs are come from Hungary. They are very aggressive at times, probably more incidences of these dogs biting not only other people, but even their own handlers. They are a very long-haired dog that's going to take some management. If you have cockleburs, if you have things like that, that big long hair can really accumulate a lot of those. And then being able to understand the chance for heat stress. But a dog that is very courageous and not going to be easily put off by any kind of predator that it comes in contact with. So if you don't have a dog, that's the problem we run into a lot with people that decide to get into sheep and goat production is, how do I get a dog? And the simple answer is you buy an adult dog, but the problem to that answer is, where do you find an adult dog, and who's going to sell you an adult dog? Because I have currently right now at my house, I have 5, and I wouldn't sell any one of the 5 of them, because if I didn't like them enough for me to keep them, I wouldn't sell them to you. And so most people that have put enough time and effort into developing a dog is probably not going to sell it. And the person that would sell it, you have to be concerned about why they would sell it. Is it not doing its job, or is it causing problems? Be careful about those free to good home dogs, because these dogs have never been around livestock and they can be a lot of problems. The best I can tell you, I have had the opportunity to purchase 2 adult dogs that were well into their adulthood, that were very good at their job. The way I bought both of those dogs, it was an entire herd dispersal. I bought every animal that this guy had, and in doing so, I bought the 2 dogs that came with them, and we loaded them right up with the sheep and brought them home right with the sheep, and that's how I got them. He wouldn't have sold them any other way, but he didn't need them once he sold his sheep. And so I was able to buy them. So most of the time, once you get started with that, then you get pups, and they can be used to train pups. And that's great. Just know that not everything that an adult dog may train your pup is something you may want them to know. They may have bad habits that you don't really want your pups to learn. They're going to teach those just like they do the good things that you want them to learn. What does it cost to keep one of these dogs? We figure it costs right at $1 a day. And I would say that cost could be on the low side now, but it's still pretty close. If you figure the good useful life of a dog could be 5 to 7 years, if you can find a pup for $300 to $400, it doesn't take very many $3.50 kids to pay for it. And so there is some maintenance costs. Most of it is in feed, and then some if rabies vaccinations, deworming occasionally. Those are things that will go into it, but there's going to be some costs associated with keeping them. And how do you do that? Like I say, most of the cost associated with keeping a dog is probably in dog food. At our house, we use self feeders, and the dogs actually come to the barn, and we have a system built where they can go through the fence and get to where the dog feeder is, and the sheep and goats don't come through there. And so those dogs have the opportunity to eat whenever they want to, and we like that, because I've had a couple of dogs that were fed at the same time you fed your goats or sheep, whatever it may be. And all that meant is that dog had to be there when you decided to feed. And that may not have been the best time for that dog to leave whatever he was doing. And so you have made that where he had to make the decision to do his job at times, or to eat. And I never wanted to put my dogs in that situation where they had to make a decision to leave what they may need to be doing to eat. And so they always know that there's dog food there when they get ready for it. We don't notice that our dogs eat any more through a self feeder than they would if we fed them themselves. They maintain good condition. Typically through the summer, they don't eat as much as they do in the winter, but it's just like us. When it's hot, you don't feel like eating. They're the same way. But for the most part, we've got along really good with that. The one dog that we had, she's very food aggressive because she was fed in the sheep and goat pens, and she had to learn to protect her food. she's not aggressive toward humans, but if another dog approaches her, another animal approaches her while she's eating, still to this day, she gets really upset. And so we don't like to have to deal with that. So being on self-feeder takes away a lot of that. It deals with a lot of those issues. Another thing that we get asked a lot is, how do you deal with like your household pets? Do you have problems with your household pets? And most of the time, if you get young dogs that come in as pups, they get acclimated to your household pets. I have a border collie that we herd with. We don't have any problems with him. My wife has a little wiener dog, and when she comes out in the morning, that's the first place she goes, is to where they are. She loves them, and they tolerate her, and everything's good when they get. We don't have any problems with this set of dogs that we've had. Now, I've had some dogs earlier in my career that you couldn't trust around anybody or anything, and we quickly got away from that type of dog and went to the dogs that we have now, and I'm glad we went that way, and I don't have any inclination to go back to the dogs that were a problem like that. Now, the one thing I can tell you where I can't make any promises is with most of our dogs is cats and chickens. I have gotten dogs from other places for both of those reasons. We got one because she would not quit tormenting their cats, their neighbors' cats, and then one that wouldn't leave people's chickens alone. Well, we didn't have either one of those, so they worked out really good. But there's something about cats and chickens that if you want them to be around, you definitely need to start getting your pups acclimated to that when they are very small. A good friend of mine that I get pups from, he has a set of game laying hens, and they are pretty good at schooling on those pups when they're little, to the point where they have a pretty healthy respect for chickens by the time we get them. And that's another thing that I'll tell you, kind of the last thing I'll tell you is I'm very particular about where I get my pups from. I've only got about 3 guys that I'll even consider getting a pup from, and they are definitely raised from day one right in with the sheep and goats. They're born there, and they pretty well spend all their time there. So we know that they have that start, and then we bring them home, and they go right to the barn, and we pet them and love on them. But when the day's over, they're still at the barn, and so they have that acclimation. But I would be very cautious about going anywhere else and buying pups, because I've had such good luck from these guys that and how many do we have? I mean, we keep 5 dogs. We don't need 5 dogs, but we have found that you can have too many dogs one day and not enough dogs the next. Things happen. And so we always have a young pup coming up, and so that we always have one growing up and learning, so that when something happens, we never have to worry about falling short or running out. And it is an investment, but it's something we can do very slowly, and we can bring pups in and let them learn, because we don't need them to go to work right away. We like to try to time that out when those pups are pretty small, when we try to stay away from kidding or lambing time, so that we don't have baby pups, baby lambs at the same time, which kind of brings in some play, and they get a little roughhoused, and things can go wrong, and some mistakes can be made both on our part and on the dog's part. And we just don't like to put them in those situations. One of the things that I've found is, if I get pups late in the fall, I don't have lambs then, and it's too cold for my wife and daughter to go outside and play with. And so by the time spring rolls around, they're already big enough, and they've kind of got good at their job. Everybody starts interacting with them, and they're good to go. So llamas and donkeys are another that I'll just tell you, they are in the right place, they are very effective. They're the good thing about llamas and donkeys, they're not affected by traps and snares. They're not going to be trying to go through the fences. We've had people tell us that they didn't think they were as likely to injure or kill goats, and I don't know that I'll necessarily agree with that. I probably would say that I would not agree with that, because they're just as capable of killing or injuring sheep or goats as the dogs are. One of the good things is they do eat the same forage that the goats do, so you don't have to try to worry about trying to keep out dog food. One of the things when we were in the goat business that we found out is that goats love dog food. And if they can ever find their way into the goat feeder, into the dog feeder, if a goat ever finds the dog feeder, they will not quit until they get in there. And so they love dog food. And that's one of the things that you can eliminate if you have llamas and donkeys, is that you don't have to worry about trying to keep it out. How well will they stand their ground? Well, we don't know. If you're going to go in that route, llama or donkey, it's probably best to have a female. They are not nearly as aggressive, and they don't tend to interact with the sheep and goats as much as males will. And we've had some, most time if you have an issue with an injury due to llama and donkey, it probably is a male, an intact male for sure. If you're going to get donkeys, you definitely want to try to stay at one, because if you put more than one in a pasture, they're going to bond with each other, and they're going to spend all their time with each other. If you put one across the fence from another, they're going to stand at the fence next to each other, and they're going to stay with each other like that. And so they're not going to spend nearly as much time out away where the goats and the sheep are to help protect them. Then we get into the lethal methods, the shooting, hunting with dogs, denning, trapping, snaring, the cyanide bombs, and the livestock protection collars. If your passive methods have failed, then this is something to consider. It typically doesn't do a good job in eliminating the problem animals. Most of the time, most of your livestock predation is due to an alpha, either male or female. That's who's going to do the killing. And most of the time, our hunting methods don't prove to control the alpha. And if we don't control the alpha, then we've just killed a beta, coyote or dog, and we don't stop the problem. One of the problems that we can see is people that just independently kill every coyote that they see. You may not be having a problem. And coyotes are very territorial. So that coyote is in that area, and he may be keeping other coyotes run away. So if he's just there hunting mice, hunting rabbits, not paying your goats or sheep any attention, and you kill him, then that opens that territory up for a coyote that may come in there and actually be a predator, be a problem for you. So leaving coyotes, if they're not causing a problem, maybe keeping the coyotes away that could be causing a problem. So don't just naturally assume that you see a coyote, he's naturally going to be a sheep or goat killer. If you do decide that you want to pursue a lethal control, contact your game wardens, make sure you get all the details, and then take advantage of the federal trappers, the state trappers. It may even be, if you want to go the other route, you have probably friends or someone that would agree to come hunt them. That is something a lot of people enjoy. But if you're going to allow hunting on your operation, you want to make sure you set the ground rules, like when they can shoot, where they can shoot, where they can hunt, when they can hunt, but your main goal, if you start hunting, is that you harvest the alpha coyote. And you may do that if hunting hasn't been utilized a great deal in that area. But alpha coyotes don't get to be to the point where they are by being unwise in their pursuits of what they do. So if there's been hunting going on in that area and they're still there, then they're probably pretty sly to the point where they're hard to get. Traps and snares, they're not something that you should be doing yourself. If you're gonna use traps, snares, probably need to contact the game warden to make sure that it's legal for you to do it, or who you need to be getting to come and help you do it. They can become trap shy very quickly. And if you botch the job of trying to trap them, it can make whoever comes in there later, their job a whole lot more difficult. And then if you're going to set out traps and snares, you need to definitely be aware of your neighbor's dogs and your livestock guard dogs, because the last thing you want to do is go down there and find either one of those in your snare. Another one that is the two that are on the screen here are definitely only regulated by professionals. You have to be licensed to utilize either one of these, but they are very effective. The M44 sodium cyanide is typically on a bait that's on a pull rope. They pull that and it discharges that cyanide into their face. Death takes place within a few seconds. The livestock protection collars are a gel pack that is typically placed around the neck of a weak animal. And typically, most of your predators, when they make an attack, they go for the neck area. They bite into that gel pack and it releases that toxin into their mouth, and death occurs the same way. But you have to be licensed to use both of those. And so those are things that they can be very effective. Once again, just talking about kind of wrapping up, most of the passive methods are very effective. You definitely want to exhaust as many of those as you can economically, and before you have to start hunting, because hunting it's very satisfying at times, but it's pretty slow and it's not a guaranteed way to make sure that you get every one of the coyotes or predators that you need to. Don't wait until the predation has become a problem before you implement some of these controls. The sooner you can, maybe we stop things before they ever become a problem. Until we get where we can arm our sheep and goats or something like this, we're going to have to protect them ourselves and just try to utilize the things that we can to keep them safe. I should have told you as we went through this, if you have questions, make sure you ask them, because I can't know that we're going to cover everything, but I can tell you I've gave this talk a lot, probably because I have done about everything wrong from predator management as you can do wrong. I've made about every mistake with a dog that you can make, and somehow, in spite of all of my ignorance, they still work out. So I can tell you they're a very resilient animal, and they'll do their job in spite of all of my shortcomings. So I've learned a lot of things the hard way, and so if I can pass any of that on to you without you having to make the same mistakes, I'd be glad to. I can't hear you, Taylor. Are you talking, Taylor? Can't hear you. Somebody else may be able to, but I can't.
That doesn't look like it.
Yeah, I got it. I can hear you now.
You can? Okay.
Yeah, hear you now.
Are there any questions for Justin? You can feel free to unmute yourself or put them in the chat box.
I either did such a good job or confused them so bad they gave up.
Well, Taylor, I don't think I can hear you. Are you talking? I see your mouth moving. All right. So I can share my screen, right? I hope. Um, last time I tried this, I had all kinds of trouble, Taylor, so this may be fun. We'll see if this is going to work. And see if I can get it to go into.
Can you hear me now?
I can.
Okay.
Let's see.
Hey, Taylor,
Yes, sir.
we could hear you the whole time we was just playing with you. No, we really could.
I probably looked like a fool then.
Yeah. Is that what part am I in the right, showing the right screen? Have you got a full screen or partial?
It's a partial. We can see like your slide.
Okay,
and then
so
the
let's,
edit mode.
You need a slideshow.
yeah, I'm trying to,
Go to display settings now.
that's the problem I run into. I can't,
Go to
What-
display settings up there at the top.
yeah, I can't see it. I don't know why. There we go. Okay, now I see it. Now, is that better?
That's it, up there.
Okay, that's this problem I had the other day. I couldn't get that to work right. So, all right. So I think we're going to talk about some challenges as far as health is concerned and parasites are concerned. And this is kind of a, when I think of health challenges, parasites are our challenge mainly, but we're going to talk about a few other health things first, and then we'll get into parasites. So, all right. So health challenges. I think if most of you have had sheep or goats, you probably have heard at least the 4S is a sheep, that sick sheep seldom survive. I think it stands true. We could say sick goats seldom survive as well. There's a reason for this phrase. And I think it's because sheep and goats hide their illness well. And by the time we figure out they're sick, they're so far gone that it's very difficult to treat them. And they are this way because they are prey animals. They have to put on a good act even when they don't feel good, because they don't want Mr. Coyote figuring out that they're the ones to attack and take care of. They're the weak ones. So they do very well at disguising that they're ill. And so I think it's really a challenge for people to find those animals. And if you're new to this business, it can be extremely challenging. Even when I think people that have been around it a while, they still can be fooled. I think that the best thing I can tell you is focus on learning normal behavior. And then when something is wrong, you usually will notice it. I think if you're going to examine sheep or goats, do it from a distance where you're not bothering them or where they have to watch you and that type of thing. Get away from them, watch them. They should stay, and when it comes to sheep, they want to stay in the flock. If you've got somebody that's hanging back and not keeping up, you're probably, that's probably one to check out. There are other things you can look at that you can see some signs there that I've listed there. I think I would watch, especially for look at the tail area. If you see any signs of fecal material there, that's abnormal. If animals are, and I will say about lameness, I think that you really need to be around away and watch and pick those ones that might be having foot issues for the most part, because I think when you'll be amazed, at least I always am with my own, that one's lame. And then when you get ready to try to catch it and take a look at it, it don't seem so lame after that. So they hide their illness as well. And it's a challenge to figure out which one of those are really that those ones that are sick. And if we don't find them early enough, our chances for being successful in treatment is not very good. As you can see, the goats are about the same things that you want to look for as far as signs to give you a clue that there could be something wrong. They're roughly the same, maybe slight differences, but roughly the same. I think another thing that's a challenge for most sheep and goat producers is biosecurity. Biosecurity is one of the best disease prevention methods that we have. And all it is in simple terms is I'm trying to keep all the bad stuff on the outside. I'm not letting it inside my fence. I'm wanting all that to stay out. It's not very expensive to implement. It's just hard to implement. It takes a lot of effort to do it. There was a study done by the USDA on goat ranches and farms. And as you can see from these survey, not very many people are implementing their biosecurity. And so I would strongly suggest that if you're going to have a sheep or goat flock, that you try to have a minimal of these types of things as your biosecurity. And biosecurity really is broken down into three pillars. You have sanitation, you have traffic control, and you have isolation. About everything we do with biosecurity will fall into one of those three categories. If you can maintain a closed herd or flock, I would strongly suggest that. That's hard to do. Most of us have got to buy breeding animals, especially males. If you're going to buy those, try to buy them from somebody that you trust. You need to make sure you isolate those animals for at least 30 days. You don't want to have any contact with the animals on your place. This is a time that during that isolation period, you could take the time to do some testing on them, do your vaccinations, deworm them. We'll talk a little bit more about the deworming here in a minute. And make sure and observe that they don't show you any signs of illness, during that 30-day period before you turn them in with your other animals. I always isolate sick animals because they'll be shedding pathogens usually, depending on whereabouts they are in that illness, but you need to get them well before you let them back in with the flock. Minimize visitors. You don't know where they've been. If you're going to let visitors come, the least they can do is wear clean clothes, wear boots, provide them some way to clean those boots, make them wash their hands before they have any contact with your animals. And again, sanitation is really important. Manure management is really important in preventing disease, keeping your pens clean, your pastures as clean as possible, all the things like feed troughs, water troughs, keep them clean. And especially your lambing and keating areas, try to keep those areas clean. I would also like to just mention challenges, and I'm just going to list this as one example. There could be others. It's sometimes hard to differentiate between diseases that you're dealing with. Johne's disease, which I think is probably more of a problem in sheep and goats than we know. There's not been a lot of studies on this disease across the United States to kind of see where we are with this disease. Mycobacterium avium subspecies paratuberculosis is the bacterium that causes this disease. Sheep and goats, as well as other ruminants like cattle, are infected with this organism very early in life. It takes a long time. It's a very slow growing organism, takes usually several months before you ever see any clinical signs associated with it. It is a wasting disease. These animals will just flat out waste away. In our sheep and goats, you're usually going to see the disease sometime between 2 and 7 years, but it may be quicker. Going to lose a lot of weight loss. Unlike cattle, you don't necessarily have diarrhea with this disease in sheep and goats, but a lot of times you will get bottle jaw. There is no treatment. Our best way to control it is biosecurity, again, following those steps so that we don't introduce it to our herd. If we've got it in our herd, testing and calling is probably the best we can do. And unfortunately, the tests that we use in sheep and goats is not the best test. We would say it's got low sensitivity. The sensitivity is okay. And what we mean by sensitivity is that means if we run the test and it's positive, we're pretty confident that that animal has the disease. The specificity is not as well. And what that means is if we get a negative test, we're not as confident those animals are negative. So we need better testing, and that would help a lot, but we don't have it. The other thing you can do is if you do get a positive animal, using your records, you can go back and you probably need to eliminate any offspring you've kept out of that particular animal and get them out of the herd as well. As you can see from those clinical signs, it's very easy. This disease could be challenging because you will most likely first thought you have is that this is an animal that has internal parasites or worms, and a lot of times we treat them and nothing happens. They die and we think, oh, well, they just died of the worms. Well, no, they died of yonis, and it would be nice to know that. So be careful about, there's other diseases like that that can fool us. Kind of our parasite challenges, we'll get into that. I think most of us know what the definition of parasite is. It's a organism lives off of a larger organism, which we would refer to as the host. It's not in the best interest of that organism to kill its host because that's going to result in it dying. So it usually, for the most part, lives in kind of a relationship that it takes what it needs to live, but it doesn't hurt its host too much if it can avoid it, because that's going to cost it its life as well. Parasites have been around forever. They're just part of the system. It's not unnatural that animals have parasites. And just because you have them doesn't mean that you have a disease. And we need to kind of, it's icky, but I think that we get too hung up on parasites sometimes as if we got to get rid of them. And the reality is we're not going to get rid of them. They keep hanging on around here. So when it comes to these internal parasites, gastrointestinal nematodes are probably our biggest issue. There are several of these out there that cause problems. The three that we focus on a lot in small ruminants are Homunculus contortus, Teledorsagia circumscinca, and Trichostrongylus colubriformis. And Homunculus is probably our biggest one. Everybody knows about the barber pole worm. We can also have coccidia problems, tapeworms, or even liver flukes in certain areas. But the big ones are going to be our nematodes. That's the ones we all focus on as causing us the most issues, with Homunculus being the big one. And just real quick, their life cycle, they're all very similar life cycle. They may not be exact, but they're very similar. The eggs are passed in the fecal material. They're going, if conditions are right, that egg's going to hatch. That's what we call our first stage larva, or L1. It'll molt to an L2. L2 molts to an L3. when things are right, when we've got, kind of mild temperature, 67 degrees Fahrenheit, 65% humidity, this process can be in a week or less to get to that third stage larva. And that third stage larva is the infective larva, okay? That's the part that the animal will ingest off some grass. That larva will crawl up on some grass, and the animal will ingest it. It'll molt inside the animal to an L4. At this point, it can go a couple of different, it can either do what we call go into a hypobiosis, where it will just hang out for a while, or it will go ahead and molt again to an L5 and mature to an adult. As far as Homunculus is concerned, when this process everything is right, you've got ideal conditions, this process can take as short as 3 weeks or less. So the way Homunculus puts out eggs and the number of larvae that can get out there, you can get a goat or sheep infected rapidly with a large number of these homunculuses in a very short period of time. So it can be a very deadly disease as far as that goes. Clinical signs of parasitism, you look for that rough hair coat, diarrhea. If it's homunculus, you're going to have anemia, probably bottle jaw. That swelling under the jaw is depicted in this picture. Of course, they'll lose weight a lot of times, and you'll even have some die. Again, if you compare this to Johne's disease, very similar in what you might see. So this is our biggest issue when it comes to the gastrointestinal parasites, and that is that we have anthelmintic or dewormer resistance. This is a worldwide problem. It was first discovered back in the early 90s, and it has come about because of the way we used our chemical dewormers, our drugs, to take care of this problem. As I was graduating in 1990 from OSU College of Veterinary Medicine, we were taught then, you always deworm sheep and goats about every month to month and a half if you want to keep them alive. That's what we did. And that has resulted in that now many of our products do not work anymore. And it's really a threat as far as small ruminant production, especially in the southern parts of the United States, where homunculus thrives. There's even been some questions whether we're going to be able to continue to raise sheep and goats in this area. And so resistance, there's a couple of different definitions I put here. Basically I would refer to, this anthelmintic resistance, dewormer resistance, as these drugs no longer work the way they were intended to work. And many of these drugs, when they're developed, when they get approval from the FDA, they're 99.9% effective. Okay, so when we use them, we're confident we're almost killing 100% of the worms that are inside that animal, mature worms. Different ones will get some of the arrested development or the L3s or L4s, L5s in there, but they're really effective. But eventually, as time goes on, that efficacy falls, okay? And that's what we refer to as resistance. It's just not going to be working as well as it once was. This is kind of a picture that just describes how this happens. If you look on the left of your screen here, and you've got these different worms or nematodes there, you got some that are susceptible, some that are resistant. When we use a drug, that eliminates those susceptible. And this doesn't happen the first time you ever use the drug. It's repeated uses over and over and over and over. Eventually, you're going to eliminate all the susceptible worms, and that leaves you with a group of resistant worms is all that's left, and then they have those genetics, so everything of their offsprings that are produced are as resistant as their parents are. So Why does it occur? It's a natural process, it's just a survival. That's the way animals, parasites, don't care what it is, they were born to survive. And so there's some worm out there that is adaptable. It doesn't matter what it is. And I don't care if we come up with a new chemical tomorrow that's 100%, effective, and we won't be 100%, it'll be 99.9% effective. There is a worm out there already resistant to it. That's just the way genetics is. And as soon as we start to use that product, the efficacy begins to decrease. Uh, um, some other things that make nematodes so um, likely to develop resistance. It's part of it's their life cycle. As we said, Haemonchus can go from an egg to an adult in as few as 3 weeks. When you're having that fast, or life cycle is so fast, and you're producing those large number of eggs and infective larvae, etc. You're just getting it's just the speed that can occur increases the likelihood for resistance to develop. So again, as I showed you in that picture, it doesn't happen overnight. It does take time, repeated uses over and over and over. It takes a while for it to get done, for that to happen. So how do we combat it? That's the most important thing. And there's several things that we can do. These are just a few of them that I'm going to go over and mention to you. You know, use your dewormers, right. Read the label, know how to store them, watch expiration dates. You don't want to keep a product very long past its expiration date. It's going to lose its potency. Try not to buy a bunch of it up and then, so that you've got all these drugs sitting around and they're going to expire. Remember, I would strongly suggest refrain from using generic products. Try to focus on using what we refer to as pioneer products, or the original product. It's been proven if we underdose, we speed up resistance. And the big thing about not using a proper dose is underdose, and the product's not going to work well, anyway. It's not going to do what it's supposed to do. So make sure that you're dosing according to the weight of the animal. Don't talk much about route of administration, since most of the products we use are oral, that we use in sheep and goats. Does play in when we start talking about cattle and the porons. You want to get that product administered on the back of the tongue. And the purpose for that is we're trying to get this to go into the rumen so that it takes longer for that drug to pass through the system. The longer that drug stays in the system and is exposed to those parasites that are in the digestive tract, the better it's going to work. If you just squirt it in the mouth and the animal swallows it, a lot of that product will bypass the rumen and go directly into the omasum, right down into the abomasum and out, and it goes through faster, and you don't get as much time in the animal, and so your kills are not as good. So other things you could do, to improve that anthelmintic dewormer, make sure if you're going to go through and deworm your animals, keep it in a dry lot a day or two. Allow that product to work, so we start reducing the number of eggs that are being produced before we put them out onto the pasture. And you probably should go to a new pasture too. Get them on a new clean pasture, so they're not going to turn out and go back out onto a pasture where there's lots of infective larvae waiting for them to ingest. Other things we could do that have been researched, hold animals off for feed 12, 24 hours if you can. Now, obviously don't do this with anything that's sick, or if you got pregnant animals or young animals, probably not a wise thing. But, other animals that you can do this slows down the speed that products go through the digestive tract. So we're increasing that time that dewormer's in the system, so we get a better, more efficient kill with it. They've used on the benzimidazoles, which is the white wormers, your things like Safeguard and Valbazen. You can use those 2 times, once every 12 hours, and they've saw that they can improve kills with that, makes them better. You know, most people now are going to combining 2 or 3 different classes of dewormer, is what's recommended. We know these tend to work a lot better, and it slows resistance. And so I suggest that now at least use 2 dewormers if you're going to need to deworm an animal. Use 2 from different classes. And when I talk about classes, I didn't put a slide in here about classes, but what we're talking about is like the benzimidazoles, or the what I refer to as the white wormers. That's a class. You got your macrocyclic lactones, which are like Ivomec and Cydectin, those types of products. That's a class. You've got your levamisols, which are a different class. So you're looking at those different classes of dewormers, and you want to pick 2 or 3 from each one of those classes. You know, going from Safeguard to Valbazen is not changing a dewormer. That's in the same class. So make sure you change to make sure that you're using from different classes when we use these 2 or 3, and you're going to use them at their full dose. You know, we don't cut doses in half or anything. Use them just like you're using one at a time, but use 2 or 3 at the same time. And the reason this works is it's an additive effect, because what one wormer doesn't kill, the other one will kill, or the third one will kill. And so it makes it those dewormers a lot more efficient that way. So we also need to monitor. That's a good way to protect. You know, it can reduce how much dewormer we use, and we're going to use it in a much better way because we're going to get it to the animals that need it and the animals that don't. And the way you can do that, you can use Famachu or Famancha, which it works for Homuncus, and there's a card that's put out that we use to monitor, because Homuncus is a bloodsucker, so you get anemia, and so you can look at the eye, and if the eye has a certain color, then we know some of those animals need to be dewormed, and we can pick out the ones needed to deworm, avoiding deworming the ones that don't. 5-point check is just basically Famancha plus a couple of 3 or 4 other things we check for, like body condition score, bottle jaw. We look at soiling of the tail, or a DAG score, hair coat, those types of things as well. It helps us find some of those other worms besides Homuncus, since Homuncus is going to give us anemia. Fecal egg counts are great way to monitor how well our anthometics work. How you do a fecal egg count reduction test is we will take fecal material from an animal, we'll deworm it, we'll do a fecal egg count, which is we're counting the number of eggs that we can find in 1 gram of feces. Then we'll repeat that test 2 weeks later. And what we're wanting to see is a 90% or better reduction in the number of eggs in that second fecal egg count compared to that first. Great way to monitor. If you want to spend a lot of money, Drench Right test is probably the best. It is expensive, but they can take fecal material from your animals. They'll figure out what is the best dewormer to use on these animals, and they will also tell you what worms you're dealing with, you know, whether it's mainly Homuncus or maybe it's one of the other worms, but they can give you all that information. But it is expensive to do that. Targeted selected treatment is based upon that we know parasites are not equally distributed within a flock or herd. We know 20 to 30%. I base it on the 80-20 rule. That's the way I can remember it. 20% of the animals have 80% of your parasites problem. It's not exactly that, but I can remember it easily that way. And what we know is if we can deworm those 20-30% that are harboring, you know, 70-80% of your parasites, that we do as good a job deworming the flock if we just deworm that group of animals as if we deworm the whole flock. So we're reducing the number of treatments we have to do. We're not using, it's protecting the drugs that we have available to us. So it's a great way to hopefully reduce resistance in these parasites. Other things that we can do to try to prolong our anthometics, our drugs, is do other management practices. Grazing management's a great one. I think you saw in that past slide that about 90% of all those infective larvae are in the first 4 inches of the grass out there. So, we need to try to keep those animals with their heads up, right? Try not to let them overgraze, keep the grass growing. We'd like to probably at 6 inches, if we get it down to 6 inches, we probably need to rotate them to another pasture. Intensive rotational grazing. If you do that type of grazing, has been shown to reduce our reliance on anthometics. Interspecies grazing works well. What bothers horses doesn't bother sheep and goats. So if a horse eats a Homunculus L3 larva, it's dead. It's not gonna survive. So interspecies grazing works well. A lot of people are starting to recommend, maybe graze our hay pastures one year and cut the meadows that we use for grazing, make that our hay. Because the longer we keep animals off a piece of property, the less likely there's going to be parasites out there. They don't live forever. They have a finite lifespan. So the longer we can keep animals off the pasture, the more likely there's not going to be very many parasites out there. Again, keep those animals' heads up as much as you can. Adding copper oxide wire particles is a good way to improve the efficiency of an anthelmintic. This has been proven with the benzimidazoles, the whitewormers. The valbazin was the drug they use, but there's some unpublished data using it with things like levamisole or prohibit. It also works, and this is where we give a copper oxide wire particle bolus, 0.5 to 1 gram for lambs and kids, 1-2 grams for adults. You do have to be careful. We can get some copper toxicity in sheep. Goats are a lot more tolerant of copper than sheep are, but these work well too. Again, it's a way to prolong, reduce our use on these anthometics so that they will continue to be available to us in the future. There's some specialized crops. There's been some research in Sericea lespedeza. We know has some anthometic properties. It's been shown to reduce Homunculus contortus when it's fed to them. There's a nutritionist down in Texas that has found he grinds up junipers and adds it to the feed. I think it's about 25-30%. He's found that he gets reductions in fecal egg counts in lambs when these were feeder lambs that he had. So there's some different things out there, and there's some other tannin-rich crops besides Sericea lespedeza out there that will reduce, fecal egg counts with when it's added to the diet or they graze these crops. Nutrition, we know that protein it decreases fecal egg counts. We're talking about protein supplementation that's in excess of what probably is recommended by our nutritionists. There's some other things like zinc and iron. We know that copper improves immunity. As we said before, copper oxide wire particles have anthelmintic properties. This may work better in breeds that have a lot of problems with parasites. It may not work in all, but it definitely know that upping your protein content is going to help you reduce your need to be deworming your animals so often. Nutrition in general, feed your animals properly and you're going to have less issue with parasites. Genetics, I think this is where we we will all be at some point in time when it comes to parasites. I think there'll probably be either tests that we can do that tell us that a particular animal is going to be resistant to parasites compared to another one, or the other thing we will see, there may be some values, breeding values that will put certain animals, in the top 10% or 1% as far as being resistant or resilient to parasites. Refugia is an important concept. You hear it quite a bit. I just want to define it. It's just those worms or eggs or larvae that have not been exposed to the drug. And these particular parasites are susceptible to that drug. So if we maintain that population that's susceptible to our drugs, when we need to use our drugs, they'll work well. And the thing that we like about this is if we've got these worms and larvae and eggs that are susceptible to our drugs, hopefully they're diluting out all those resistant genes that are out there so that our drugs will continue to work for longer periods of time. Again, we talked about biosecurity. This goes back to biosecurity. Isolate, and if you're going to buy a new buck or a new ram, or even a female or a ewe or a doe, you're going to buy some, you're going to isolate them for 30 days. You ought to deworm them with 3 classes of worms. You ought to do a fecal egg count reduction test on them because you really want to see a 90% reduction in your fecal egg counts on those. If you don't get that, that means those animals are harboring resistant worms and they're going to contaminate your pastures with those. So you have a decision to make there if you run into an animal like that. So I would really recommend that you do this. One of the practices I think are really important to do to try to protect yourself from, you don't want to buy problems. It's the main thing to remember. I don't want to buy these resistant worms. So follow these. So that's kind of a real quick synopsis about some health and parasite problems. I think just inclusion, worms are our biggest health problem. They've been for some time. They're probably going to be in the foreseeable future. We've got to do everything we can to maintain the drugs that we have. There's not any new drugs coming. And so we need to protect those as much as possible and use them wisely. I'm not telling anybody not to use them, but use them wisely. Try to do everything you can to manage those parasites and not use up the products that we have. Be aware that not every animal that gets sick is wormy. So be careful about treating animals for worms when there's another illness going on. And they're hard to find. They hide it well. And I strongly recommend for everybody to, if you don't have a biosecurity plan, sit down and develop one. There's a lot of places you can go to get templates to develop those biosecurity protocols, but it is a great disease prevention method, and it's one that we need to incorporate and be doing more often than we do in our, not just sheep and goats, but cattle, most animals. We don't have good biosecurity programs in place. So does anybody have any questions? I know that was quick and fast, but be happy to answer it if anybody has any.
Does anybody have questions for Dr. Whitworth? You can feel free to put them in the chat or unmute yourself as well.
There we go.
Or if anyone has questions for Justin, he's still on as well.
Maybe I should
Okay.
say if you have a lot more interest in parasites or health, you might want to think about going to the Meat Goat Boot Camp this fall in October. I think it's fixing to open up if anybody wants to sign up.
Absolutely, and we can actually put a link to that in the email that we send out within the next day or so as well, if anyone has any interest in that as well. Okay, so I don't see any questions for Dr. Whitworth or for Justin. Thank you guys both for taking the time out of your evening to present today on sheep and goats. Like I said before, we will send an email out within the next day or so. You'll have a YouTube link to the recording of this video, and then some additional fact sheets and that kind of stuff. And we'll make sure to put the link for the Meat Goat Boot Camp as well. So thanks again, guys. The next one is going to be coming up May 2nd. It's going to be over pecan production and soil testing and plant tissue testing. So again, that'll be on the first Tuesday in May, which is going to be May 2nd. Okay, if anyone else has any questions, they can feel free to contact their local extension office. Thank you, guys.